and welcome to another developer interview for our Perceptive podcast series here on Game Wisdom. For tonight, we're going to be once again talking about tabletop design. My guest is a tabletop designer who has made a variety of games, and they're interested in chatting about that as well as any other topics that come up. So please welcome to the podcast, Taylor Reiner. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me. This is so exciting. Yeah, I'm super, super excited. I think the tabletop design space is kind of exploding in a lot of really interesting ways. So I'm super excited to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And as always, for those of you watching, if you're interested in coming on to chat about game dev or about a game you're working on, please reach out through emails, my sign up, any which way that you can. Yeah. And to what you just said there, Taylor, I've spoken to a few tabletop designer and pen and paper developers over 2025. And the space
Mhm.
has definitely been, I think, consistently strong, at least in terms of getting more eyes on it. So, before we chat about that, since it's your first time on the cast, could you talk a little bit about who you are and what is your background when it comes to game dev?
Yeah, yeah, totally. So yeah, my name's Taylor. I've been working in game like dev and design and such for I think 4, 5 years now. It's not terribly long, but it's been a really fun kind of sphere to really explore. There's been kind of explosion in I think maybe like after 2020 and like kind of pandemic, like I think like a lot of the tabletop design uh has been really, I think people just sat with our ideas and they're like, okay, let's start designing. So I think that was a big impetus for me. But yeah, so I've been working on both new designs, but also in the tabletop sphere, game development can also be like working with an idea from someone that um, starts out as maybe not fully formed or like maybe needs more content or whatever it needs to be, and then fleshing it out and growing it or polishing it. And so they've both been really interesting, kind of scratching different itches or kind of sides of my brain. But I've been tweaking with a lot of those type of projects where it's like I'll get a game, I'll play it, I'll see what maybe can be changed, and then like kind of go from there and kind of like what levers can be pulled. So it's been really fun.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of attracted you to working on tabletop games?
Yeah, so my day job is a software engineer, and I I I was making some like video game stuff, but it's one of those things where you're coding all day. Sometimes you want to change uh, once you're off hours. It's like a chef who doesn't want to cook at home. When they when they get back from their job. So I wanted to get a little bit away from screens, and I noticed that there's still like such a fun or like that same kind of dilemma and puzzle uh, when you can actually really constrain yourself to like physical elements too. So like I think it started off as video game design, but I think I gravitated more toward tabletop just because there's like an interesting constraint that sometimes breeds creativity that I found.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and we definitely have seen that, especially like again, like for a lot of like first time developers, even some established developers watching this, like one of like the oldest advices that's always given is that tabletop or paper prototyping has been a really good way of kind of like introducing yourself to basic mechanics, start being able to kind of create like this like physical idea of what your game is supposed to be.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've chatted on this before about UFO 50, but that game is just so fascinating. But the designer John Perry, one of the co-designers, had a GDC chat about the idea of like tabletop design and video game design, and sometimes like you can be constricted by the components in a physical space that
Mm-hmm.
actually can lead to like interesting solutions that then can translate to a digital space. Um, so yeah, I've found that like even when I was doing video games, like paper prototyping has been really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And yeah, like UFO 50 was an amazing game. We could probably spend the entire cast just chatting about all 50 of those games on it easily.
Yes, so wild. Such a yeah. Okay, yeah. I want to go, but like amazing work. Yeah, it blew me away.
So, when did you first start making tabletop games?
Yeah. So I I was first interested in I had a design challenge actually, and it was to try to use the standard deck of playing cards, like a bicycle deck or whatever you can find it out, and create a new game with it. And it's interesting that that deck has been around for years and years and years, right? And like try to force yourself to use the same components to have like a twist on a mechanic, or like try to create something new that has been around for so long or something so old.
Hmm.
And so that was the impetus. That was like the first start. And ever since then, it's been really fun to, yeah, like put these constraints on and then see how to break out of it. I watched a talk by, I think, Rob Davio, who talked about how you always want to question like what if you could just break the rules in an interesting way and like follow the fun and kind of see where that goes. Um, so yeah, that was kind of the impetus. Is like, what if you just had a deck of cards, can't do anything else, no other components, and then see what happens. Yeah.
Yep. And I interviewed another tabletop developer like a few months ago that
Oh,
he works on a lot of like World War II or kind of like period
cool.
games. His
Yeah.
game was like Taylor and Charlie, I believe it was called, and he also used like the a standard like 50 card deck in order
Oh,
to like tell different stories or use cards along those lines. And again, like one of the things that I think is like a very important part of game design, not only just in the tabletop space, is being able to do something given limited resources. Because again, like as anyone who's watching this, we all have that idea for, if I had infinite money, infinite time, what can I make with that? But
yeah.
I think the big things, I guess, is a good question for you in the tabletop space when we talk about like in the digital space, especially the last 5 years, there's definitely been this trend towards more sustainable goals in terms of game dev. Making smaller games, the whole meme of I want games made with worse graphics, people work less, and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And
Yeah.
I guess like from your perspective and making tabletop games, how has like or has the tabletop space changed at all in terms of I guess like standard processes or just like standard development or like the past like 5 to 7 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. It actually reminds me, I was reading about like Naughty Dog when they were working on Crash Bandicoot, and they were like, we only have this much space to fit on a disc, like back in the day where like you had a cartridge, you had a, you couldn't have just games that could have giant, um, you know, like patches or like whatever, like you couldn't just keep growing a game. And so I think back to like tabletop, I think what's really interesting there is I think generally the fact that the game takes up physical space in someone's house, as opposed to nowadays where a video game can be downloaded and it's on your hard drive, or it's loaded up into your like PS5 or whatever. But so like now, when you have to have like a physical space for the game, a lot of times people are very conscious of how big a box is, or like how many components are in a box, or also like reusing components. So sometimes it gets like way back in the day, like not too like 10, 15 years ago, I think size of box wasn't too big of a deal. But now a lot of time there's this idea in the tabletop space of like shelf space, and like how much um, a game will take up on your shelf like actually has an impact on, like, even if you like a game, do you like want to keep it because it's kind of big. So um, when I'm working with some publishers, so like I did development on the Lord of the Rings trick taking game that just came out, and we were talking about the box size a lot because box size can convey an experience to players. So, like, if it's a bigger box, you expect a bigger game. You expect
Yeah.
a lot of, yeah, like a lot of components, a lot of choices, a lot of like strategy, and then sometimes smaller boxes can convey a little lighter game, a little like flippant, silly. So then we kind of try to get in the middle there. So it's like about like three deck size, just to convey that, like, even though it's a card game, there's like a lot of choices and stuff. So it's interesting, like buyers on the shelves, or like when they go into a game store, they can see a game box size, and that will have a little bit of like a wink or a nudge to like what the experience is going to be. Um,
Mhm.
Whereas digital, a lot of time, like I'll scroll through the Steam store page and it's just a picture, right? So like you don't quite know. Obviously, you can read reviews or like, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I think like to that point about like space or hard drive space when it comes to games, like one of the funniest things like for me because I play so many indie games is like I can play like an indie game and get like 700 hours out of it, and it's like it's only 800 megabytes big.
Yeah,
Or I play a
yeah,
game that's like 50 gigabytes and I maybe get like an hour or two's worth of entertainment out of it. Like from like my perspective, like space just no longer like is like a qualifier. But like again, like going back to as you were saying with like Crash Bandicoot, especially like the mid '90s, early 2000s era, there was that kind of sense of quantity being a huge
yeah,
metric. Anyone
yeah,
here who grew up playing JRPGs, where it used to be like the minimum was 60 to 80 hours you were supposed to get out of one of those games. And then
yeah,
again, we
totally.
fast forward to the day, and telling someone here's 80 hours of game to play, and they're going to probably go running for the hills instead of being interested in it.
Yeah, totally. I think there's something to, and I think it plays with genre because I
Mm-hmm.
know like JRPGs, uh, like someone might be aware, so like, oh, this might take a long time versus like some indie games, but even like certain indie game like Slay the Spire, like I put so many hours into that and like it's 20-minute, 30-minute sessions, so like
Mm-hmm.
it's fascinating that some, yeah, but like the indie size or even the price tag like doesn't really convey how much you can get out of a game nowadays, which is kind of funny.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And to bring this to the tabletop side, in terms of as you were saying, in terms of like the physicality of it,
Mhm.
that has been, I think, one of the more fascinating things. It's something that whenever we have a discussion about like tabletop design, tabletop development here on the channel, I always bring up the successes on Kickstarter that we have
Mm,
seen some phenomenal. Like I think we're talking like many times about how like the digital side of Kickstarter I think has cooled off, especially like the last like 7 or so years. The tabletop side seems to have shown like no real sign of stopping. I was
yeah.
just as we were just chatting a minute ago, I was looking up the one Kingdom Death, which I remember was like one of like the highest rate or like highest successful Kickstarters. And
Mm.
apparently, as an update for every one of you listening to us, they apparently ran another Kickstarter back in June and brought in just over 12 million for their latest like Kickstarter campaign for that. And when we and in terms of like building a tabletop experience, like as we said, like that physicality aspect of it, I think really is one. It's a huge selling point for people. Again, you get a game that has like unique figures, great card art, great like
Yeah.
kind of like tactile or haptic feel to it. It can
Mm.
sell really well. But then conversely, there's of course the challenge of shipping and logistics, and this is
Yeah.
always, and this is like another like go-to topic when we talk about like tabletop and physical goods. Is just creating something that takes up space, as you were saying, like in terms of simple box. Like
Mhm.
for those of you who are watching this, you can see my room here. Like this is not exactly a giant room. Like I could never set up a massive game here and run it. But I
Mhm.
guess like from your own perspective, how do you think about physicality as a tabletop designer? Because this is again some topic that we really don't talk about in terms of digital games.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I first really ran into this when I sold some games in Japan. I went to a Japanese game market in Tokyo, and when after I went, there were some great folks who kind of showed me around, and we went to like game cafes, and we went to different spots that had essentially like Japanese game stores that essentially showed off what the vibe is for shelves in Japan. And like this is just in Tokyo, but in Tokyo, like there's not that much space in an
Yep.
apartment, so like none of the game stores had giant like miniature figures or like like Kingdom Death Monster like that wasn't anywhere to be found just because there just wasn't the space for it. Uh, it's interesting because I totally get the allure to having like minis and having like a more immersive experience. And it's interesting that the Kickstarter it's been around for so long, but like the Kickstarter like hasn't really stopped. Yeah, like I don't want to say craze because it's just keep going, but like the Kickstarterification of board games has like been an interesting kind of like I think people who like minis have kept supporting it, and then some people who have been like, I don't know, have kind of gone back to like the is this game size worth it or not? Um, yeah, I've been around people who have have kind of cooled down on giant minis and stuff. I think they're more they're like they're more like I'll have one or two of those, and like that'll be like my game. Like if I really want an immersive kind of experience, that'll be kind of like my go-to. Um, yeah, it's been really interesting because sometimes you're like, oh, I can get 10, 20 games that are smaller in the same size as that big one. So then it's like, what's worth more, like the 20 games that I really like or the one game that I love. Like, yeah, so it's an interesting kind of push and pull. Yeah, that was the first time that I really noticed that was in Japan when like I just didn't see minis anywhere, like any game shop, any game cafes at all. And I was like, oh wow, they really just like smaller games or like card games over there, which is interesting.
Hmm. Yeah. And when I was doing like research for like some of my talk, I was getting about the arcade industry and especially about like fair play design. Like the Japanese market came up there because, as you said, like they have such a smaller footprint, so they obviously can't fit a lot of stuff there. It's why mobile games and of course the arcade industry thrive there far
Yeah.
stronger than what we have here in the United States.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. And I think it's just like a form factor. And
Hmm.
I mean, the Switch is, so big. I think there's something that speaks to just like getting a lot out of a small package.
Hmm. And with again, like coming up with like kind of like the physicality or the dimensions of a tabletop, from your own perspective, are there any like important considerations or like easily to fall into traps, like for a first time developer
Mm.
listening, that you can kind of advise on?
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good question. I've noticed that sometimes folks will have a lot of moving parts, like they almost want the whole table to kind of be filled.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've seen designs do more with less sometimes in tabletop, just because I mean, when I play a video game, like sometimes it's really helpful to have like a HUD and have like a lot of like really interesting stuff. But I think Dead Space really stood out to me, where like your health bar was on your back and like the ammo was, um, like on the gun itself, if I'm remembering correctly. But like I think there's there's like the idea of doing more with less. And so sometimes I'll see early tabletop designs, people have like kind of the whole kitchen sink in there. Um, and a big question I ask when I'm doing like game development is like, oh, what could never leave? And like if I take out this entire deck of cards or like this entire mechanic, like will that just ruin the game for you? Like it's kind of like a lot of a lot of things people are like ambivalent on. And so if you're ambivalent on it, sometimes it's maybe a good idea to take it out and test the game once without it. And so sometimes I'm kind of like a less is more type mentality when I'm doing dev.
Yep.
Yeah.
And again, like the same that we said in the digital space, with trying to focus on a really solid idea versus trying to make the every game or try to throw every single idea that you have in. And again, like with the idea of the physical nature of tabletop, you really are far more constrained there. Because as you said, like if you think about, I'm going to make a tabletop game that requires like three full length dinner tables in order to play, you'll have people who will have that space. They'll love it. For the vast majority of people, they'll be like, I will never be able to play this game in my entire life.
Oh, totally. Um, yeah, that's like a really interesting aspect to that comparison is like also um, so like video games sometimes uh, unless you have like couch co-op or like online multiplayer, sometimes it's easier to get a game played because you only need one person. But I think a lot of board gamers or tabletop gamers, they sometimes struggle getting enough people to the table, or like people with interests who want to play um, similar games that they like. And so I think that's also an interesting thing is sometimes like we have made games that are campaigns that are like pretty long, and it's cool to be like, oh, there's tons of missions, like there's all this content, but sometimes it's like sometimes it's a big ask. So like part of it is also like what can we remove to make we have a game that's like chapter scenarios, and we want like even if we make 50 of them, maybe whittle it down to like 30 of like the best of the best. Um,
Mhm.
and so that's sometimes part of it is like making sure the best parts of the game are in, um, as opposed to like a lot of good parts, uh, which is tough because I think there's like a lot of designers who love so much of their game, and so it's hard to like kill your darlings and
Mhm.
cut stuff out. Um, but another like thing I heard from John Perry, which was so interesting, was like sometimes you can make your game worse, and then it ends up being better than where it was. Like you like trim it in weird ways and like see where it goes. And you're like, it might feel worse, but like just keep going to see what happens. And like, so it might be good, and then you you make a change and it's worse, and then it might be great after you make like another change. So I think part of that is like, yeah, stripping out what doesn't need to be in there, and then like seeing where it goes, which is really kind of a guiding light for me.
Mhm. Yep. And I mean, the same definitely can be said when it comes to digital games. I've seen a lot of first timers and students struggle with that idea of I'm just going to keep adding more and more to it. I can't remove anything, or they'll run to that period of I'm just going to keep trying to make a different game. So I'll get like 10 months into this game. No, I don't like it. Let me move on to this one. Another 3 months. No, I don't like it. Let me go to this one. Maybe I'll go back to that one. And it just ends up being like this endless dev cycle.
Yeah, I've noticed the last like 10% is the hardest. Like
Mhm.
finishing games is so brutal. And I, so one of the first games I tried to make was like a deck building game, and it was so big, and it was just so hard to finish. And I was just like, oh my gosh. So that when I pared it down and it was just much simpler and much smaller, just getting one under your belt, like getting one out there, that's even if it's smaller, um, it just feels good to be like, okay, nice. So yeah, like I've always been like, yeah, just like whittle it down because then you can kind of get grasp of it, um,
Mhm.
which helps kind of focus too.
Yep. So, in terms of some of the games that you worked on, I was looking at your page on Board Game Geek. So you did the Fellowship of the Rings, the trick taking game. Was that
Mhm.
something that were you like the lead developer on that, the creator, or did you work with like a team for that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's the studio is called Office Dog that I work for, and then they are owned by Asmodee, who does so many games. I think are they Catan or Ticket to Ride? I'm showing my ignorance here, but they have a bunch of big games. But so um, they reached out and were like, "Hey, we have this idea of a game," and then I played it, and I was playing it with a designer. So in the board game space, like designer is someone who can kind of come up with the idea, and then game developer is someone who will work on it. Um, and so they hired me as like a game developer, and so it started off as um, like a small deck of cards, and like you just played three kind of rounds of a game, and then since we had the rights to the books, part of the development was growing it out into the whole first book of the Lord of the Rings, and then later this year we're coming out with the Two Towers, and then after that it's going to be Return of the King. So there's like kind of a fun series to it all, which is really nice. But I worked with, yeah, I was the lead developer, but I was working with the game designer Brian. So he and I would bounce ideas back and forth, and I think, well, he was also studio head, so so he was
Mhm.
like, I'll sometimes be like, oh, what about this wacky idea? And he's like, I think that's a little too wacky, and then like I'd be like, okay, that's fair. And so, but we would riff a lot, and I think part of the fun of working with someone on a game, which I highly recommend if no one has done it, like I mean, talk about UFO 50, like they work together on all these games. guess they kind of had to with 50 games. But working with others, you can really throw stuff at the wall and have like an interesting kind of like person to bounce things off of, or like a check. Um, uh, Sometimes I'd be like, "Is this too wacky?" And then Brian would be like, "No, that sounds great. Let's try it out." And then sometimes I'd be like, "This is too wacky." And he's like, "That's a little too wacky." um, so uh, yeah, so it was a really fun experience because uh, similarly, we were confined to the. It was kind of an adaptation of the book, so you know your limits, but you can kind of have room to breathe in the mechanics. So you can play around with like how does Frodo play as a character when you are Frodo. Um, and I played a lot of the like the PS2 Lord of the Rings games growing up, uh, which were so much fun. So I drew on that as well. Those are great.
And for people who aren't familiar with the term trick taking,
Oh yeah,
what does that mean? Like from like a tabletop or a tabletop design perspective?
yeah, totally. So very popular games like in this genre of game that's called trick taking are like Hearts or Bridge or Spades or Euchre. Those are kind of like somewhat popular in different spots of America. Um, and then in Europe, there's like tarot and like Doppelkopf and stuff. But so the premise is you will shuffle a deck of cards, everyone will get their own cards, and then one at a time, everyone will play a card to the table, and that's essentially a trick. It's just jargon for everyone playing a card. And then someone will take that. So someone will play the highest number, or like whatever it is in the game. Um, in the Lord of the Rings one, all the cards are different parts of like the Lord of the Rings universe, like Middle Earth. Um, and part of it is like Frodo wants to win rings, and like yeah, like some characters are greedy, like Gollum or Smeagol or something, and so they try to win a lot of tricks. Um, just kind of like thematic that way. But so yes, trick taking games are essentially just people playing one card at a time, and then you see who wins, and then the winner usually plays the next card, and then you kind of just go around the table. Playing cards, pretty much. Yeah, that's the simplest kind of.
All right. And with kind of getting the Lord of the Rings IP for the game, another thing that I
Hmm.
like to ask, like when we talk about games built on pre-existing IPs, how much does like I guess like when you're thinking about from the design standpoint, does the IP factor into the design? I guess like another way to
Yeah.
put it is, do you think about the IP first and then think about mechanics, or do you think about the mechanics first and then how do they fit within the IP?
Oh, it's a great question. I think what was really fun was the game started off as the entire fellowship as characters, and you would get a hand of cards, and you would pick one of the fellowship characters. Um, and that character was different goals you had to complete, but we tried to make it to where the character was thematic. So, like I was saying, like if the character is greedy in the book, they want a lot of tricks. Or if a character doesn't really do much in the book, they want zero. Like they want to not win anything. Um, and so I I thought the IP helped a ton because it helped us have like theme first
Mm-hmm.
design. Um, when we so how the game works is you play through different chapters of the book, and every new chapter you will run into a new character. And so part of the fun was I would read the book and then read the wiki on that character and like really try to understand who these people are. Like Fatty Bulger, like who is this character? And then try to think of a mechanic or like a game language that would come through in that character. So like Fatty Bulger is a good example. Um, he as a character doesn't go out with Frodo. He's a hobbit who like just doesn't go out with Frodo and Sam. He's like, I'm gonna stay here. And so in his thing, he actually gives cards to other players, and he actually doesn't play out the whole hand. He has like a smaller hand. So he actually like he actually like kind of ends early. And so like the player who picks Fatty is actually like sitting there and doesn't play some of the tricks, which is really funny. So it's it was really fun to have that as like a guiding light to always look at the IP, look at the character, see what they do, see what they how they kind of act, and then how that can like inform uh, the game mechanisms. Like Gandalf's a wizard, and so he does like some magical things in the game. Like he can kind of cheat a little bit that no other player can do because he's kind of magic. Things like that, which is fun.
All right. And with kind of like designing a game, like this is designed to be like a cooperative game, so it's not like you're like the players aren't necessarily fighting against each other, trying to complete the scenario or complete their different quests. How does like I guess this is another thing, like from like my perspective, when I play a lot of video games, we're talking about, of course, player versus AI or player versus
Yeah.
player. How like from a tabletop standpoint, do you think about design a game where there isn't like a player versus player elements, a group of people trying to complete a task in that respect?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it's super interesting. Uh, Way early on, one of like the first big cooperative board games that came out was Pandemic, and that was essentially players versus the game. The game would mess over the players. It had a system where uh, they had these cards called epidemic cards that would every time they came up, it would just a lot of bad stuff would happen, and players would have to constantly fight the game in different ways, and the game would try to make them lose in different ways, and it felt very like the game versus the players, and so the players form this like co-op and camaraderie because they're trying to fight the game. Um, there's been some interesting development on that, and where there's some games that are still competitive, but the game still fights at you. Like I think like the Game of Thrones board game has it to where you're different kingdoms fighting, but if you don't like fight this over like, this looming threat, you all lose together. Um, so that's a really interesting. But fast forward to this game. What's funny is uh, players aren't really. I guess they kind of are, but they aren't really fighting against the game in that they have a hand of cards, and like that's every time they play a card, that's like their choice. And the game isn't really actively fighting against them. They're more just like you have to complete a goal, I have to complete a goal, and then they have to complete a goal. Um, and so you have a limited amount of time. That's I think more the resource as opposed to like the game fighting against you. So it almost feels like a time trial. I was talking about this with a friend the other day that there's no speed, like speed running in board games, like in because we were watching like a summoning salt video on Melee. But yeah, like I guess in the sense of the game, every time you play a card, you're lowering how many actions you have. So I guess that's a timer of sorts, even though it's like not real time. But anyway, like this is that's kind of the camaraderie and the co-op nature is like we all have goals to satisfy, and so maybe the card I play right now is maybe good for you, but maybe I could have held it and it would have been great for me, but I have to make that choice of because we all lose or win together. Like, is this card better for you or is it better for me? And so there's kind of like some push and pull there, which is fun.
Mhm. And with kind of developing the like different goals or different ways of playing the game,
Mhm.
as you were saying a few minutes ago regarding kind of basing it off like the different characters and kind of having that like lend themselves to like the cards or the styles. Were there any ones that like particularly like stood out to you, like in terms of like something that either did something differently or they just like really liked their approach?
Yeah, yeah. So there is there's one in the upcoming Two Towers where someone plays as Treebeard, which is that giant tree that's like a little slow. It talks a little slow. Um, so the whole shtick of Treebeard is that they're delayed a little bit, and Brian came up with this wonderful mechanic where the card you play is actually like one delayed from the card that you just played. So like you're always behind by a trick, and so that just leads to like a lot of kind of hilarity, but it leads to a very interesting puzzle because you're like, oh, if I need you to win, but you're behind by one, I need to like think ahead and like the card I'm playing now is going to go to you later. It's a really interesting kind of puzzle. But it was fun to have, yeah, the character being like like that one stood out a lot because they talk so slow as like a um, fun thing to implement in the game. It's fun to have like game what's it called, like diegetic or something, like the game language itself
Mm-hmm.
communicate the theme. Like it's like, oh, you feel as a player, you feel how slow it is. Like you almost want to. Sometimes when you miss a trick because you're playing slow, you're like, oh, I just wish, I wish I could talk quicker. Like you really feel like you're a tree bird. You're like slow, which is great. I've had players really um, lovingly, uh, like how do I say this? Yeah, not frustrated, but like they're like they're lovingly like, oh my gosh, I really need to get my head wrapped around this because it just messes with their head in funny ways. But yeah, that was a really fun one.
I'm looking at the screenshots for
Oh,
the game, and the art looks really nice for it. I guess with as we were talking about earlier, with kind of like the physical nature of a
mm,
tabletop game, that so much about the appearance really does, I think, like help sell it. Whether we're talking about massive figurines, really good card art, dice,
yeah.
cards, tiles, whatever. With kind of coming up with like the aesthetics of a game or aesthetics of a tabletop game, what has that been like for you?
Oh, that is such a good question. So in I keep tying it back to video games because it's so interesting, but like in video game space, I've noticed like definitely on the App Store, there's a lot of like crazy icons or whatever. But I've noticed sometimes like streamers streaming an indie game will sometimes boost that indie game's status to like the stratosphere, right? Or like it'll get like a
Mm,
lot of attention. And board games doesn't have that many streamers really right now, just because I think there's a level of like you would almost need to stream like your table and everyone around you, and like it's like a little bit more involved. Um, there's definitely some who are great, but I think video games has just like more streaming and stuff. And so what
mhm,
I've noticed though is in person and at game conventions where players have the game out at the table, that has almost been an interesting element of uh, like showing off the game and having people come over and be like, "Oh, what are you playing?" So part of the art and the graphic design is, or like having really good art and graphic design is like what will have people come and look at a game from across the table or like at a con or something. Like I think board games is a lot of like not word of mouth, but like there's a there's a kind of a how do I say this, like a etiquette at a board game con where like you'll put the game box face up so it shows players what
mhm,
you're playing at the table if someone's interested, so they don't have to like interrupt and be like, hey, what are you playing? And I think this game specifically with like the stained glass art does a great job at like people seeing that and wanting to see what this is. And I remember we covered like four different styles, I believe, on what to go with, and the stained glass one ended up being it because not only was it gorgeous, but the aesthetic was one that I don't think has been on a lot of Lord of the Rings products. Like Fantasy Flight has had some of those more like realistic ones, or like there's been that like, cartoon one from like the 70s, 80s, kind of the Hobbit vibes. But stained glass hasn't really hit Lord of the Rings. So the designer Brian, who's amazing, is such a big fan. He was like, "This would be so fun to have stained glass reimagining of a lot of the Lord of the Rings characters." So I think that's kind of the route. It was like gorgeous, it was new, and then it stood out physically because the game box itself is like technically shiny.
mm,
Uh, it's hard to see over a photo or like online, but like in person, it has that factor of like that like alluring factor of calling people's attention to it. Uh, so I think that kind of all came together as like the idea behind that kind of aesthetic, which I think is great. I think it looks awesome.
mhm. And to kind of build off of that, in terms of like the physical nature of tabletop games, one other question I want to ask you, in terms of, I guess, applying the mechanics to a physical setting, what I mean by that is when we talk about a video game, if you want a GUI window that takes up the entire length of someone's monitor and gives them 10 paragraphs of information, you can do that. Now, of course, that's not really good onboarding. When we talk about a playing card, you're obviously limited to the dimensions of the card itself.
Yeah.
So, in terms of like presenting rules or presenting how the game is played in the physical setting, do you have any advice or any thoughts on that particular aspect?
Yeah, yeah. I I watched a lot of. There's this amazing board game designer who does a lot of card graphic design. I think it's Daniel Solis, who talks a lot about how big an icon should be, how big a number should be. Like it's like you can really overwhelm players by putting too much information on a card.
Yep.
I mean, similarly in video games, like I'm sure you've seen pictures of like HUDs that are just like, what is going on here? Yeah,
Mhm.
like um, I think I even remember this wasn't a HUD, but this stood out to me. I think I was playing Smash at like 8 players once, and someone's parent walked in and was like, "What is happening?" Like, if you don't know the language of Smash, like, it looks very well. I guess 8 players is pretty chaotic. Um, but anyway, back to back to cards. I think I think with cards specifically, and with board games specifically, like, there's a funny thing where players are not having the same perspective usually. Like, if you play couch co-op video games, or like if you play video games online, everyone's looking. They have the best view of the monitor, right? And they're all looking at the same monitor. Uh, but in board games, sometimes you're at a weird angle, or like you're off to the side, or sometimes the board's upside down. That's a classic thing. Um, so I think sometimes board games struggle with that element of like, can everyone read it at the table? So cards, like good card design, I've noticed, is something that can be read like upside down, downside up, like anyway it's flipped. Have a lot of like very legible, readable colors. Like I think this is a big. I watched like a Game Maker's Toolkit video on this. Like accessibility on colors is definitely a thing that like video games are getting really good at. But like what's tough is, in a video game you can go to the settings and like have a slider for like how much saturation you want, or like uh if you like are certain colorblind, you you can change settings, like in the new Spider-Man or something. I'm trying to remember, but like what's tough is in a physical space you only can print something once. So
Yep.
a lot of what goes into it is like, there's a lot of tools online that are like, hey, if you have red green or whatever, if like it's in low light, what does it look like? So it's a lot of like measure twice, cut once in tabletop, because man, I have had situations where someone has printed a lot of a game and it is not right, and it is like,
Oof.
oh no. Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I think back to like, again, like those old PS1 days or something, where like, yeah, you shipped it and it was done. Um, so so yeah, so I think also showing it to other people has been really helpful. Just getting other takes on it. There's an idea. I think this is in video game design, but like a blind test or blind play test, where you give the entire thing over to someone else and they just play it and tell you what you think. That's really helpful, because sometimes like if you're there in the room, you're like answering questions that um, maybe the rule book should be answering. But yeah, so I think uh, overall, like having someone just look at it is sometimes really helpful. Like, because sometimes people be like, "Oh, that card looks weird." That
Mhm.
you've been looking at something for so long. Uh, you've probably had that, where if you're like listening to an audio for a really long time, or like you're editing a video or something, like you kind of just you get so ingrained, um, that when someone just comes over and is like, "Hey, that's a little different," and you're like, "Oh, thank you so much." It's a classic thing where like you'll, I think it was like an editor that was like, "Oh yeah, they edit over a book tons and tons of times, and then they hit print, and the first thing they notice is like a typo on the first page, like when the book comes in." Like it's like that type of stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, and I've had that with some of the books I've written too. And in terms, like as you were just saying, in terms of having someone like come over and look at, it, I think that takes it's a good lead in talking about playtesting. Like
Mm-mm.
from the digital side, even with the fact that video games are obviously digital, there has been a lot of challenge with getting people to playtest a game, getting proper feedback, etc., etc. From the tabletop space, what has getting playtesters or playtesting done been like for you?
It's so interesting. Yeah. So there are really great tools now, like online sites or software that let you mock up certain games. Like I think on Steam there's Tabletop Simulator,
Yep.
and then on um, uh, like there's playingcards.io. or like there's different sites now that let you really be able to mock it up. I remember back in the day, um, it was hard to get folks to um, like it was hard to coordinate sometimes. But I've noticed like now through like Discord and like and online software and sites, like sometimes it's a lot easier now to like to coordinate people. I'm thankful that I've met a lot of folks through going to gaming conventions and meeting up with people that I'm able to have like a good circle of people that they have prototypes, I have prototypes, and we'll do like a swap, like a prototype swap, which has been really fun. Um, but it gets that similar thing where like sometimes you just want new people, so you don't become like an echo chamber. And so I I have like some local game shops that I'll go down and visit. Um, and then I know like on the digital side, like I know friends who for their video games will go to like PAX West or something and like have like an indie booth and like they'll have like an arcade cabinet set up with their video game and like they'll have people who are walking by come play and that's really fun. They said they've gotten like a lot of really good feedback on that. Um, yeah, it's tough because sometimes also like you'll you'll show it to you'll show the playtest and it will either it'll be obvious that the game isn't or like that tweak you made isn't right and so you'll have to be like I'm sorry like I know we just sat down but I might call it early which always is embarrassing so there's some like social faux pas but I've noticed like if you're with cool people they always know like hey I get it but yeah overall like it's been really nice to meet up with other folks who love design and like I think they those types of people have more affordances, which is really nice. So I would recommend like I think meetup.com had some really good offerings when I looked at it. And then I would go to like local game stores or like yeah, just different discords and like you can kind of get really I think that's the best thing is like people who are like minded and like also have games and like you there's people out there that really want to you know do a game swap and that's like I think ideal at least at the start phase. So that's usually what I'd recommend.
And with game playtesters and kind of looking at feedback, what are you like looking for, like when you're doing like a playtest session of your games?
Yeah, yeah. I played early on. I play tested a game by a designer who said something that really stuck with me. Where they said people were giving him feedback, and they started giving him solutions. And the designer was like, "Thank you so much, but I'm more curious in how you feel." And they kept asking like how you feel, and it's been interesting. I kind of take everything, but it's been really interesting when I have like targeted questions. It's more about where are people frustrated or like lack of agency
Mm-hmm.
or feeling like their choices are meaningless or like a waste of time. And I think that is super helpful because like as the designer or like developer, it's my job to like take those issues and like go work on it. Um, and sometimes like I think it's interesting to hear, but sometimes people will give like solutions. And sometimes it's a solution that you tried, or sometimes it doesn't work because of X, Y, and Z. And so sometimes I'm like, thank you. Uh, um, but I think when I do have targeted questions, it is more about like, how did it land for folks? Like, how does it feel? Because sometimes, uh, yeah, like like I said, like solutions are just like, or maybe they don't fit with like what you're trying to go for. But I've had it to where I also so I my senior project was working with Unity and a metrics company, and we were attaching a metrics collector onto like Unity cameras on different games. And what it was essentially making like it would track like heat maps of where someone died on like a platformer or like where you got caught on a stealth mission. And since you could tie it to the camera, it could catch like, different angles and like it was pretty interesting. But long story short, it was that also helped me realize like when you have a lot of data in a lot of like targeted questions of like, oh, where is this game failing? Then you can really like the more you know, the more you can do with. So I sometimes will like not overplay test, but like even if I feel great, I'll be like playtesting and like open to any feedback, and that's been super helpful because sometimes that even if I think a game's done, sometimes people will say something. I'll be like, oh, that is a great point. Um, so yeah, so sometimes even when the game's like 95% done, I'll still play this a little bit and see what people have to say.
Yeah, and with like the playtesting side, again, like part of that challenge that we see kind of universally is trying to kind of parse the feedback that you're getting. You said like people will offer you plenty and plenty of solutions, and you'll either have some that you've already thought that didn't work, some that you never thought of, or those that
Mhm.
there's just no way it's going to work. Like, hey, can you make the single player game give us, complete 16 versus 16 multiplayer? We would really appreciate that for your game. And given like the physical nature and physicality of a tabletop game, with trying to, I guess, like add more to it, like this again goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the constraints of the dimensions of a box. How
Mhm.
do you think about in terms of, I guess, like the final version of it, or like where do you want to set that limit of what you want in this game?
Yeah, no, that's great. Uh, I've I've hit that where I'll make a party game and someone is wondering if it works at one player or like or vice versa, like you said, the single player multi co-op. Um, I'm a big fan of like having a game do what it does really well. Uh, so like if it only works at three players or four players, like that's it. So I have been always comfortable to like cut something. And what was interesting was working on the Lord of the Rings was there were a lot of chapters that we could fill, but if one interesting part of tabletop is like you print out the card. This is like manufacturing detail, but you print out the cards in like a sheet of like 18 or 9 or whatever the manufacturer does. And so sometimes you might see this in games. There might be like a blank card at the end or like an advertisement card at the end because they have just like extra cards they don't know what to do with, right? Um, so one of the fun things is like if you're working with a manufacturer, sometimes you're like, okay, where's the card limit at? And I've had things where a variant that someone wanted to have in the game had gotten into the game because I had a few extra cards. I'm like, you know what? Like it's a variant.
Mhm.
I have extra cards now after talking to the manufacturer. Um, I think it's worth it. So sometimes like a game will will grow just on that like literal printing mentality, like the fact that it is a printed physical product. I think there's something that is funny with games is that you you can always have so many things you could go with. And I've known designers to put like tons of variants in the back of the rule box because you can just play so many different ways. Uh, but like honing in on like what is the number one way to play is like a big part of the job. And so I think that restriction sometimes is super helpful because it's like, hey, if only the deck can be 80 cards, then it can't actually play 5 players because none of cards will go out to all the players. So it has it's been helpful to like some recommendations during playtest is like, oh yeah, this could totally work for 5, and then it's like, well, I don't think it'll fit in the box. So that's been a nice, even just mentally, because like sometimes to get 5 people together for a playtest is sometimes hard. You're like, you know what, I'm okay with with not having to try to coordinate a 5 player playtest. But yeah, overall, like I think box size has been a nice, almost not excuse, but like a good reason to like keep a game small or like keep a game contained.
Mhm. And I guess as a follow-up question to that, I think this will probably be one of my final questions for you for today. In terms of like pacing or length, as we were talking about earlier, with video games, we've seen this push for smaller lengths when it comes to oral games, more quality, less quantity. From a tabletop perspective, how has that been like? Are people enjoying? I guess like the first part of this question is, what is kind of like a typical like average length for like some of your
Yeah,
games or for the Lord of the Rings games?
this is such a great question. There is so sometimes when I'm curious of like what a medium values, like movies or books or whatever, sometimes I'll look at what reviewers have like as a rating scale. Like some reviewers will have like for movies, they'll have like are the visuals good? You know, the graphics are like is the soundtrack good? Was the acting good? Like the directing, cinematography. Um, in board games, replayability is like a pretty high metric for a lot of reviewers. And so what's interesting is like a lot of people will play a game, and even if it's like their favorite game, if you can't replay it, or if it has low replayability, they will lower some of those ratings. They're like, "Hey, this was a great time, but you know, I can't really replay it, so not my favorite." Whereas, like, I think other mediums, like, yeah, you'll go see a movie, you'll go play a game, and you're like, that was great, 2 or 3 hours, and I'm done with that game or whatever. Um, so average game time of my games is probably like 25-30 minutes. But what's interesting is so with the Lord of the Rings one, it's it's like you can technically play it however you want, but it's technically um, like I think most people play it by playing it through, like starting with the first chapter and then playing it all the way through to the 18th chapter. Um, because in the rules it says if you beat the chapter, you can move on. If you don't beat it, you may move on, or you can replay. Like your choice. Yeah. We didn't want it to be frustrating for players if they couldn't beat a level. And there's definitely one level on there that is very, very, very hard. Um, but so what I've noticed is I think it almost depends on the game for like replayability because we put in a rogue goes on chapter or like a sorry end game plus kind of mode in Lord of the Rings. Um, and I mean, that's the classic thing with tabletop is you don't quite know stats. You don't know how often people are playing or like what people play if you have multiple nodes in the game. Um, whereas, like, I know video game devs who will be like, "Oh, do I have?" Um, there's like multiplayer and single player. Like, you can keep stats on how often people play what. Um, but yeah, I think in usual like or usually like board gamers really like replayability and like if you have played your game like 10 times or like if they play your game 10 times and they don't see a reason to come back, like it's not too interesting, um, then that is like a big knock on it. I think part of the solution is in competitive games, like since you're always playing against other players and they might try different strategies or like you might play with new players, that kind of keep it fresh. Um, whereas sometimes cooperative games, sometimes people, they won't want to replay it too much because they feel like they've won as a group and like they're done with it. So it's kind of interesting how it changes per game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like I said, with digital games, you'll have people who they'll want to replay a game. There's especially multiple endings, multiple ways of playing, and then you'll have people who the second it's over, that's it, put it to the shelf.
Yeah,
We're never touching it ever again.
yeah, yeah. There's like that completionist video game YouTuber who like
Mm-hmm.
try to get all the Zora seeds and Breath of the Wild or something. Like just like people do crazy platinum trophy stuff that I shouldn't say crazy. It's really cool, but it's like a lot.
All right. So before we kind of go into like our final wrap, are there any other aspects regarding like the Lord of the Rings games or just general tabletop design that you like to bring up?
Yeah, I think I'm always a fan of just people making a game, and part of the reason I got into like trick taking and card games is because you just need a deck of cards and you can start making a game. And I found that sometimes people, like you were saying, like put a lot of work in a game and it like won't come together, and there's a lot of pieces, and so I would recommend people, yeah, check out the like physical card game space and just see if you want to like whip up a fun little game because you can do it, I think, like much quicker and like get to like a really cool, fun little idea like much faster. So that's my shout out.
All right. So, with that, to kind of take us to the end for our discussion, in terms of like what you're working on next or what's coming next. So, I was looking at the page. So you have the second game, the Gifts of Gal, I cannot pronounce her name. I'm going to completely mess it up there. That one is currently out. You're working on the third one now. Are
Yeah.
there
Yep.
any other projects that you're currently in development or working with?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, the Two Towers comes out. So the second one in December, which is fun, and then the Return of the King comes out. I don't know if that's been announced, but later. And then I'm working on. It's right here actually. It's funny. I'm working on a game called Sail Legacy, which is really fun. But essentially, if those are unaware, like there's an idea in the board game tabletop space where it's like a legacy game where you will put stickers on it, you'll write on it, you'll rip up cards. Like you're essentially using the game, and then at the end you have like a personal game that you can replay, but it is your own game um, because it's you did a bunch of stuff to it. So I'm working on that, and then there are a few other kind of like campaign games that are going to be announced soon. So I don't know what I can say, but yeah, I'm there's some fun stuff in the works.
Right. And yeah, if you're free in the future, come back on. We always try to follow up and talk more about tabletop design.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think yeah, once like something's good announced, it'd be really fun to circle back and see how folks feel about those ones that came out, and that'd be cool to come up or talk about similar topics and see what has changed. Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. And one thing that we didn't touch on, but that always seems to pop up when we have discussions, in terms of, I guess, like the logistics of tabletop games, like for you in the studio, how has that been in terms of shipping, logistics, and that kind of thing?
Oh man, um, the tariff stuff has been crazy, but
Yeah.
the yeah, a lot of like game manufacturers are in Brazil or China, and so some of the ones in America are now just overrun with or like it's been tough to coordinate. But I think I think like the board game space is always very adaptable and malleable and tough.
Mhm.
So I'm interested to see like how it changes. But yeah, there's been like a lot of interesting, clever solutions to like maybe like if shipping is really expensive, there's like different ways to import the game or like yeah. So I'm hoping things get easier. But overall, yeah, like it's been tough because instead of just downloading a game like in video games, you have to ship it, and like
Mhm.
you're saying, like sometimes it's a big box and like shipping can get expensive. So I'm hoping things stop. Like I hope that the price and of things kind of levels out so that it
Mhm.
isn't too expensive of a hobby in the future because it is so fun. Yeah.
All right. So, do you have any like final words of advice, and you like to share for any tabletop designers or enthusiasts listening to us?
Yeah, no, I think it's one of those like those worlds, the tabletop worlds, or the more like you're finding more and more niches. So just check out a bunch of different stuff. There's a lot of fun YouTubers who cover tabletop design journeys and stuff, and I think a lot of them have like a really fun, interesting, introspective. Uh, Adam and Wales is great, but I think I found that a lot of if you're doing video game or tabletop design, like we can learn from each other, and so it's I think it's a lot of really fun cross-platform information.
All right. And before we say goodnight, do you have any like to say to any fans of any of the games, any of the other stuff that you work
Oh,
on to take us out?
cool. Yeah, thanks. It means the world. It's awesome to do wild, silly, goofy ideas that hopefully people have fun with and make people happy. But yeah, thanks so much.
Right. So, with that, do you have anything you would like to promote, website, social media, etc., etc.?
Um, I have a. It just covers a bunch of trick taking games, so it's a bit niche. But I have a YouTube channel called Taylor's Trick Taking Table. It's all trick taking stuff. So be warned, it is very niche. But other than that, yeah, no, I just have a variety of games. So and some of them you can play with a standard deck. So if you're just ever curious and wanting to see what a game's like, you can just buy a deck of playing cards and see. So yeah,
Right. So, with that, I think we'll say goodnight for our cast. You'll find a link to Taylor's page on Board Game Geek down below. And as I said, if you're interested in coming on to chat about game design, game development, teaching, whatever, be sure to reach out. Buy all the many copies of my books. I don't have a tabletop book yet, but maybe at some point in the future.
Mm.
Again, Taylor, thank you so much for reaching out, and best of luck with the remaining Lord of the Rings and whatever other projects you have next.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh.
Not a problem. So with that said, everyone, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where you some of the art and science of games. Until our next chat, have a great night.